Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. With us today will be the radio play-by-play voice of Michigan basketball, Brian Boesch. Before he joins us, let's get started as we always do with a few news and notes. We held off on getting the show up at its regular time on Tuesday for a couple of reasons. We thought there might be some news by now on the Jim Harbaugh situation, and there really hasn't been much. And Michigan played Maryland on Tuesday, so we wanted to see how that turned out. So the only thing I can tell you at this point regarding Jim Harbaugh is what Nick Baumgartner said Thursday morning in The Athletic. Michigan officials say they have had productive talks with Jim on a new contract. However, sources say there is concern among high-ranking officials whether Jim is torn between staying at Michigan and returning to the NFL, if the opportunity were to present itself. So as they say, stay tuned, but that was from Nick Baumgartner in The Athletic on Thursday morning. Sam Webb is basically saying the same thing, as is John Eubank, and so we really just have to wait and see how it plays out. In the meantime, let's talk some Michigan basketball. It's been a rocky road for Juwan Howard and his team so far this season. Joining us on our game day segment this week with his thoughts is the radio play-by-play voice of Michigan basketball, Brian Boesch. So stay with us. Here with us on our game day segment as we take a look at just where Michigan basketball is right now in late January is the radio play-by-play voice of Michigan basketball, Brian Boesch. Once again, great to have you back with us, Brian.
Glad to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
For starters, it was good to see Hunter Dickinson back on the floor the other night and really playing well.
Yeah, and really he had started to get those numbers up beyond even what we saw last year from him in the first or in the last 5 games or so before he was out with COVID. And I really thought that, he started to assert himself and really be kind of an emotional and even a vocal leader in that second half at Rutgers. When Michigan was shorthanded, Hunter was still out there. Obviously he caught it after the Rutgers game. But Michigan played shorthanded. They never had a lead, yet, he really tried to get Michigan back in that game and at times made it pretty interesting down the stretch. And that certainly carried over. He told us on the radio post game on Tuesday night that it kind of surprised him that he was going to play for 30 minutes like he did, but he went out there, he played well. And you're seeing what the benefits can be of returning to school like he did. He made a 3. He had a career high in assists with 6. He's gone to his right hand. I mean, you see the progress there. That doesn't guarantee he's going to be, a lottery pick or anything along those lines. But, he's making the necessary improvements on the floor that will impress NBA scouts while, most importantly to Michigan, giving them the type of boost that they need. They need him to be an All-American type player, and I think he was on Tuesday night.
Yeah, he was outstanding, and great to see him back, of course. But there were other good things that happened on Monday against Maryland. A couple of them were Caleb Houston, 16 points, and he found his groove, and as we all know, that's been tough for Caleb this year. Moussa Diabate added 14 on Monday against Maryland. And, they both looked like they were loose and having fun, Brian.
Yeah, I think it's fair, and it's very difficult. I've said this before. It's one thing to be a 5-star recruit, and it's a whole nother process to become a 5-star college basketball player. Now there are some of the anomalies who do come right in and are great right out of the gates. In particular with Caleb, the expectation was probably a bit high because of what he was replacing, and not just the talent level, but I mean, you're replacing Isaiah Livers, who had played at Michigan for 4 years. I'm not saying, directly, right? There's some Isaiah Livers, some Franz Wagner, who played 2 years at Michigan, but had some professional experience overseas before that. And then Sean D. Brown Jr., who was, a veteran, even though he had only been with the program for a year. That is, you're talking double-digit years of collegiate or similar experience to try to come in and basically say, hey, you're the starter, we're hoping for 30-plus minutes from you, go. And I know it's oversimplifying. I mean, the coaching staff is not saying it like that. There's a lot of incremental improvements, but I do think that was, kind of the natural puzzle piece and kind of the expectation. And for me, it was good to see him. He hit a 3 early in the first half. He hit a 3 early in the second half. And I think that type of confidence is important. Now, what's the next step? Well, for me, I think it's doing something similar on the road in a hostile environment against a good team. That's what Sunday against Indiana certainly presents. And what is nice is that the Big Ten will provide plenty of those opportunities. Caleb has not hit the ground running, but Franz didn't either 2 years ago. It took him a little bit of time. He had some good games and some bad. And remember, this was around the time where he was really starting to take off. Michigan in turn finished 8-4, and I really think, and I'm not going to go to the Isaiah Livers level and say that team in 2020 was going to win the national championship, but I will say this: I felt pretty darn confident that Franz Wagner was going to become a March darling had there been a tournament that year, and maybe Caleb Houston is following a similar script. He has the type of talent that at least puts him in that conversation.
When you have a night like he did against Maryland, you never know when they're that young what flips the switch. And we all know, shooters, when they get on a roll, when they find their groove, it doesn't matter where they're playing, they're going to hit their shot. We'll see. As you said, big opportunity on Sunday against Indiana. Devontae Jones had 12 points on Monday night, too, and 2 3-pointers, I think it was. To me, his overall play at the point, Brian, has been markedly better lately, as if he's just getting in sync with everyone now.
I agree. I think he's really started to find himself. And again, I think it does take time. The reality is, when you have these up transfers, like a Devontae Jones coming from a mid-major to a high major, a Mike Smith, the Mike Smith results of the world are more of the anomalies. More often than not, you're going to have guys who struggle. Either they never really truly find their role, or it takes them some time. And I do think that Devontae Jones is on the latter of those two options where, yeah, did it take some time? Of course it did. This wasn't a smooth, transition all the way through. But, for the most part, Devontae, I think, has played within himself. I'd like to see him take a few more threes. I think that really opens up his game, and he's been efficient with them. But he has had to at times kind of, will Michigan through some difficult times. And I like the upside there. And I like the combination and the, really the difference in style between Devontae and Frankie Collins. I kind of liken it to an NFL running back combination of, you got the bruiser in Devontae Jones, and then you've got the speed threat in Frankie Collins. They really mix things up well, and Frankie had a good game. Devontae's playing well. I think that point guard position is turning into a strength. But again, I think the key is, can that translate on the road against some of these big-time Big Ten teams?
Glad you mentioned Frankie Collins, because, he was a spark off the bench the other night, and he's been doing that for a while now, but he's getting better and better, isn't he?
He is, and I think, listen, he's going to have some freshman moments. There have been a few games where he has struggled. I think Central Florida was one of those. But it's just about adding a different element. And I think where Michigan is struggling a little bit at times is not necessarily – part of it is trying to create your own shot, but I think it's also just trying to create your own offense. And Frankie's not going to be a guy who's going to set up a jumper or a three-pointer. He can certainly drive to the basket and create for himself. But I think his speed and really his fluidity, I think he has an ability to control himself on most possessions when he really accelerates. But he can help open the door for another player. So when you don't have, that perfect creator, that guy who can just go out and just, like a Zach Irvin type, who can just go out there and just get himself a shot. And Livers is in that camp. Certainly Wagner has shown that before in his time at Michigan. Frankie has the ability to set up others, occasionally take something for himself. And I think he's got a really solid role. I never really bought into let's just start Frankie and let him roll, because, again, there's a lot to learn with Frankie Collins at the college level. But, boy, I love the upside, and I do really appreciate the dynamic and the differences that he and Devontae possess.
When the season started, the expectations for this team were through the roof, and if a reasonable person was looking at the roster, you knew you were going to be putting a lot of young guys into this rotation. But it is coming together, and you can see the future, and there's just a ton of talent. It just has to get that experience and mesh.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, listen, I think, you can sit here and say, 8-7 is not what anybody expected, nor did this team expect to be 8-7 at this point. But you do see the growth, you see the talent, you see the opportunity, and there's still some guys who need to elevate their games in order to, really get this team back into, realistic Big Ten contention and into the NCAA tournament picture. But you got what 10 scholarship players who are in their first or second years at Michigan. It's to me it's a lot more about the fact that they lost as much as they did, because it's a lot easier when you can ease players into these roles. Now, listen, 5 stars aren't going to be eased in all that much. You figured Caleb and Musa were going to play a lot. But, I think Kobe Buffkin has shown some flashes. He's also shown some signs that he needs to improve. And that's a McDonald's All-American who's on a team that does, I think, have some minutes that, could be up for grabs. They're not forcing him in there. They're not forcing anything. So, listen, I think two things can be true at the same time. One, this team has not lived up to its own expectations, and certainly not the expectations outside. And two, there's still a lot of positive trends that are going in a direction that gives this team a chance over the next 6-7 weeks to try to play itself into the NCAA tournament. Is a Big Ten championship run probably a little bit unrealistic? Yeah, I would say so. I mean, listen, they can still win their next 15, right? Like, they're still in it, don't get me wrong. But I think this team should and absolutely can make the NCAA tournament. That should be the goal. I thought it was interesting what Jace Howard said in some media availability before the game on Tuesday. He made the comparison to UCLA. I really wonder what the comparison about UCLA was at this point last year, right? Mm-hmm. They peaked at the right time. Michigan, who knows when Michigan's peak was last year. There were plenty of them, but obviously it wasn't that fateful Tuesday night in the Elite Eight. So, can this team take that type of a route to where it wanted to go? Who knows? There's a long way to go to that, and I'm not saying that, that's a certainty by any stretch. That's what every, team that isn't in the top 15 is telling itself right now. But it is something to work toward, and there's no denying that Michigan has a ton of talent. It's there, but now you need to blend it together and prove it against some really good teams.
Let's talk about the defense for just a minute, Brian. Obviously, it's not been great so far this year, but against Illinois last week, very good. The guys came out, they were very aggressive, communicated well, and the same thing against Maryland. So the work and the communication on the defensive end of the floor is also getting better, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think where Michigan has really, at times, been a little bit shown some of that inexperience is on the defensive side. But, I do think that, Hunter Dickinson certainly helps to stabilize that. And I think he has improved defensively from last year to this year. Musa Diabate is starting to get more and more comfortable on the defensive side of the floor. Obviously, I think where Eli Brooks, is so valuable to this team is when he's able to just lock down, the other team's top perimeter shooter. Mm-hmm. And I think it was tough for Eli to play 35 minutes as at times this team's number one creator. That's not his or his number one offensive threat at times. Mm-hmm. That's not his game. He's been massive for this ball club, but if you can settle him in to be, I'm not saying he's got to be the fifth option like he was last year, but he can be the third, maybe even the fourth, then that allows him to really put a lot more emphasis on that defensive side of the floor. So I think that's where you can see some more growth and upside from Michigan's defense. I think Devontae Jones has certainly improved in the last few games, but it has to continue. It's not a finished product by any stretch, but you're starting to see those metrics get better and better. A few times on the road, we've just seen that one big run really hurt Michigan. Can you stop the bleeding when the crowd is really getting into it against you? And that's that to me is one of the many signs that you can point to say, yeah, this team is improving and evolving, and that's a step they still need to take.
Brian, about a week ago, Juwan said he thought this team was close to a breakout performance. He saw it in practice. He knew it was coming. From your vantage point, was that Maryland game maybe the breakout game?
I think it could be. Now, I think it's fair to say you want it to come against a team that's better than Maryland. I think Maryland they're just in flux with the new head coach and Danny Manning. Some pieces that there's a lot of transfers there. They haven't really been able to mesh, and certainly that coaching change, that doesn't help things. That makes it a challenge. So, I think, listen, Michigan's performance against Maryland and at Nebraska are both really solid, but I think you need to see something similar against a top half Big Ten team. Now, that can be home, road, neutral. I don't care where the heck it happens, but I still think that breakout is it's still down the road. Where I think Tuesday was necessary and was helpful was I think that was a confidence booster that allowed Caleb Houston to say, you know what, I can do this at the college level. Mm-hmm. I've proven it on the international scene. I've shown glimpses here at Michigan. Here's where I can push through. For Hunter Dickinson, it was the confidence of, man, you come off of COVID, and I'm sure there was some doubt, right? Some wondering of, well, how is my endurance going to hold up? Did I get enough practice time? And certainly it worked out. It looked like he hadn't skipped a beat. Eli Brooks didn't have to be a main offensive threat, and look what he did defensively. Devontae Jones, another solid game. So I think it's a building block, but I still think that if this team is to make the tournament, the Maryland win can't be the breakout game. There has to be probably a few more that have more oomph behind it.
Well, Sunday we head for Assembly Hall, a place that has been very unkind to us over the last couple of decades. Just such a tough place to play. Yes, Maryland might have been the breakout game, but if you can get two and get one on the road against IU, that would be impressive, wouldn't it?
It would. I don't care how – if Michigan can get it, it doesn't matter how it happens. It can be ugly. It can be an offensive game. It can be a defensive game. That is the type of game that Michigan can go and say, you know what, listen, we learned from the second half, collapses at North Carolina, at Central Florida. We can learn from that Rutgers game where we just never gave ourselves a real chance to pull it off, and see that energy carry over from what we've seen, in my opinion, over the last 100 game minutes. Since the second half at Rutgers, I think that's been the most consistent, high-level energy and effort that Michigan has given. Can that continue? And if it does, they absolutely have a chance to win. That's a good Indiana club. Trace Jackson Davis is a good player. He's one of the best in the Big Ten. He's certainly going to be a heck of a threat for this ball club to handle. But, if the energy that is there from the last 2.5 games and the execution is there from Maryland, then, yeah, this team has a chance to win it. And then you got a home date against Northwestern, which, that's by no means a gimme. They won in East Lansing. That's a team that can get you on any night. But you're going to be favored in that game. You start to play that schedule game and say, okay, there's a little bit of a window here to gather some momentum before some real challenging games coming up in late January and into February.
Well, final question for you, Brian, before we let you get away. Going into the IU game, 8-7 right now, and if you turn on ESPN, BTN, it doesn't matter who you're watching, they're all talking about who's in the tournament, what the seeds are, which seems crazy at this point in January, and then who's on the outside looking in, which is where they say Michigan is right now. If we're going to put ourselves in the position to be there and have a chance to get into the big dance, it's going to take a heck of a run, isn't it?
Yeah, I haven't really done too much in the way of thinking, okay, well, what realistically needs to happen? Because, again, like where Michigan is right now position-wise, it's really tough to gather how many at-larges are truly available because there haven't been any bid feeds. There hasn't been – inevitably there's a few teams that make these crazy runs on the positive side, even on the negative side where things really fall apart on them. So it's really tough to tell. But obviously it's going to take a Big Ten record of 500 or better. Like that is a requirement just based on their overall mark. Yeah. Michigan played a really tough non-conference schedule, but you're not getting into the dance if your record isn't 500 or better, right? We know, or better than 500. You're not going to get in at the break-even mark either. So you have to get at least 10 wins in the Big Ten. I think you probably, depending on who you beat, right, you probably need to get one, maybe two more, whether that's in the regular season or come the Big Ten tournament. It's going to be a bit of a moving target, to be sure. But, when you play a tough schedule, but you don't take advantage of a lot of those opportunities, your margin for error goes away. What's great about the Big Ten is that it helps in that you have a ton of opportunities to pick up quad one wins. Almost every game is a quad one opportunity for your ball club. So they're going to have their chances. But, yeah, I think if we're looking at it realistically, 10-10 in the Big Ten seems like the low water mark of what you're going to need. And then, if you win a few more, you probably don't worry about leaving it in the hands of the committee. If you're right at that mark, you probably got to do some work come Big Ten tournament time and then root for all the favorites come conference tournament time. So it is a moving target at this point. But I think right now what the team and really what the fan base's focus should be on for the next 2-3 weeks is, can this team start to realize the potential that it had a few months ago and actualize that with wins? If so, then this team's got every chance to not only get into the dance, but maybe make some noise.
Here with us on our game day edition of the show today has been the radio play-by-play voice of Michigan Hoops, Brian Boesch. Brian, great to have you back with us. We have plenty of great basketball ahead here in the next 8 weeks or so, so we thank you for your time and look forward to getting you back on.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
On Quick Hits today, Michigan will take their 8-7 record on the road this Sunday to Assembly Hall in Bloomington with a 3:30 p.m. tip time. Coach Kim Barnes-Arico and the women's team is back in the top 10, checking in at number 8 after a huge win on the road against Maryland. The Lady Wolverines are at home tonight, Thursday as we are recording, and then Monday against Purdue. We are 6-1 in Big Ten action, 15-2 overall. Number 3 ranked hockey, 18-6-1 overall, 9-5-0 in Big Ten action, looks to create space in the Big Ten standings as it heads to number 11 Minnesota for a 2-game road series. The top 2 teams in the league will square off on Friday at 8 p.m. on ESPNU and again on Saturday at 6:30 p.m. on the Big Ten Network. Softball and baseball are now holding indoor workouts in preparation for the start of their respective seasons. Softball starts the season on February 11th at the USF tournament in Tampa. Baseball will get underway a week later down in Arlington, Texas in the College Baseball Showdown, so only 2 weeks away. It's right around the corner. That will do it for now, though. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine weekend, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!